All right, good evening, it's Nurse here. I'm just going to do a quick review over all the stuff that we already basically talked about today. Um, so we basically went over the role as a nurse aide, and we talked about communication. So basically, your duties as a nurse aide is to observe, document, and report. What are you observing? You're observing everything from the way that the person chews to the way that they ambulate to the way that which is walk, ambulators walk. Um, the if they're making facial grimaces, any of those things, you're observing it. You're going to document those observations, and you're going to report them to the nurse. Okay. Um, and we didn't really talk about this, but we'll talk about this into detail a little bit later. The types of observation, but just so you can touch, you'll be familiar. We have objective and subjective. Objective is anything that you observe or see. Use your eyes. So use your eyes, your ears. Okay. Anything that you use your senses for. Subjective would be anything that the residents say. So if they say they're in pain, that would be subjective observation. We talked about the communication types. You have nonverbal and verbal. Nonverbal is your body mechanics, the way that you're standing, if your hands are crossed, if you're rolling your eyes, if your voice is loud, your tone of voice. Verbal would be anything that you say out your mouth and anything that you write down. So if a resident write, help me on the paper, that's considered verbal communication. Okay. Um, we also talked about how we communicate with our residents. The call system is very important. Everybody should have a call bill. We talked about the different types of call lights that your resident may have. No call light, that's neglect. We don't want to be neglectful. We did talk about what neglect is. Neglect is basically not doing something that you are supposed to do. Okay? So you did not, you neglected to give them the call light that will be on your NAR, your nurse aid registry, if anything comes about. We talked about abuse. That's kind of simple as anything any verbal abuse, any actual physical abuse, any emotional abuse. Um, Locking a person up to their wheel, pushing a person up to a table and locking their wheelchair, that's a form of abuse. Okay, we cannot restrain anyone. We'll talk about restraints when we talk about the basic nursing skills, but we do not really use restraints anymore. But we do still have to talk about them just in case if you have to work in a psych ward or anything of that nature, you know how to use a restraint. Okay, and what you're supposed to be doing when you're using restraints. We also talk about communicating with different impaired residents. And impairment is any type of loss of function. So we talked about speech impaired, hearing impaired, visually impaired, physically impaired residents. The main thing is make sure that they have their assistive devices, which would be those hearing aids, glasses, dentures are assistive devices. Make sure that those products are clean. It is our job to clean them. It is our job to store them properly. If they're supposed to be left with the nurse, it's our job to make sure that we do that. Just to make sure we cover some things. We talked about professionalism, how to look professional, how to act professional at all times. We are medical associates and we need to act as such. Never share your passwords with anyone. Log off every time you use any devices. Never use a pen if we do have to document on paper. Everything is pretty much on the computer these days, but if you do have to document anything on paper, always use a pen. And never erase anything. Always draw a line through it. For example, if this was wrong, I would draw a line through it, put error, saying it was a mistake. I'm going to write my initials, and then I'm going to write what I wanted it to say. Okay? So that's how you correct things. Because these are legal documents. If anything were to happen, they use everything that we document in court. So make sure you're documenting accurately and you're not making things up. All right, so that's it so far for